Hi everyone, I'm Zach Reinhardt, here to review the new Shugo Tokumaru record, Toss. Shugo Tokumaru, if you don't already know, is a Japanese singer-songwriter who has been at it for 10 plus years. Yeah, I think his first album came out in like 2004, 2003, somewhere around there. And this is his sixth album, following up his 2012 release, In Focus, which was a pretty nice set of very sharply written, concise, and fairly complex indie pop songs. And that's kind of what Shugo's been known for. He has this strange ability to just kind of pile a whole bunch of seemingly random instruments from his typical guitars and drums and bass all the way to like toy pianos and tiny xylophones and orchestra instrumentation and synthesizers. And he can just pile all this stuff on top of each other and make it into a coherent song that not only sounds good, but actually sounds like really natural, like everything was meant to be there. His songs do a lot of sound play and have a lot of depth to them very often, though he's not above a simple acoustic ballad every once in a while. So I was looking forward to this album. The singles Vector and eventually Lift dropped for this thing, and they're both great songs. And Shugo's never really had a bad album yet, so there's no reason to believe that this was going to be anything other than solid, enjoyable indie pop music with a bit of a weird Shugo Tokumaru flair to it. And that's exactly what we got. This album kicks off with the track Lift, and it's a nice little indie pop intro palette cleanser to set you up for the rest of the record. It's a pretty short track at under 3 minutes long. The song starts off with these kind of building synthesizers in the background and this kind of washed out acoustic guitar that builds into a kind of nice, quaint little indie rock, indie pop song. And it just keeps building. It doesn't really have like a straight like verse chorus structure to it, and it just kind of grows and grows until eventually you've got a full string section on it that gets a really kind of cool and somewhat intense compared to the relaxed rock around it instrumental part. And the song goes as quickly as it came, but leaves a distinct impression as to what you're going to hear. You're going to hear some very kind of unique, instrumentally rich indie rock and indie pop. And the first three tracks kind of build off of each other and get more just intense and bigger and just have more things going on in them. And the climax of that is the song Taxi, which is my favorite song on the record. This song features some of the best drumming that you hear on the album, and the drums on this record are played by one of my favorite drummers, Greg Saunier of Deerhoof. And if you follow my reviews, you know how much of a stickler I can be for drums. But yeah, Greg sounds great on this thing. His drums are huge and kind of booming, but they don't take up so much room in the mix as to like clutter the song and not leave enough room for the menagerie of instrumentation that will come later. The intro features these kind of strange brass hits with like chaotic playing from an xylophone or maybe vibraphone. And the kind of strange chaotic intro gives way into a more typical groove when the verse kicks off. You get this kind of cartoonish almost groove between these this kind of walking bass line and this kind of silly brass section. The song immediately kind of comes off as being kind of lighthearted, not taking itself too seriously. But that doesn't stop it from being a really sharply written and really instrumentally dense and complex piece of pop music. There's some really kind of cool instrumental parts. There's a lot of different instrumentation bouncing around. The song is constantly shifting. Like they don't stay on one melody for too long. They'll like play a melody for one part and then they'll bring in a new melody and you'll never hear that prior melody again. The song almost sounds like it's being played on some sort of large monstrosity of instruments that comes out of like a Dr. Seuss book or something. But it all comes together to make one of the best pop tracks I've heard all year. And at this peak of intensity in these first few tracks, the album just kind of drops off like a cliff into a soft, stripped back, understated piano ballad called Route, or Route if you're one of those people. This is one of the more simple, less kind of intense songs on the record. It doesn't really have that same like degree of just crazy instrumentation or anything like that. And it's a decent track. I like it, but it's just a really weird drop off from the kind of peak that Taxi was. It was like the album was kind of building like this, and then it just went like that in kind of intensity. And it's a little jarring. I think this song could have been played a little later in the track listing, especially when the intensity just picks right back up again on the next track, Cheese Eye, which is a instrumental track played by a full chamber orchestra. This song is apparently inspired by kind of old American cartoons like Tom and Jerry. And I gotta say, he really hit the nail on the head with this song. It sounds exactly like it's meant to. I can almost picture some sort of silent cartoon episode being played along with this music. But the song is really kind of hard to describe to you beyond that, as it just shifts so much. Like it doesn't repeat any parts at all. It is constantly moving. It is constantly changing to new parts, new melodies. It is constantly just turning over. And it gives the song a lot of kind of dramatic tension to it. It gets kind of jazzy at times. It gets really tense. It gets really kind of blissful and soft. It's very dramatic overall. And all I can say is it's wonderful. Like it's a really kind of joyous, just beautiful song. And all I can really recommend is that you listen to it for yourself. I can't really describe it to you in any meaningful way. And this song ends, and the next song, Hikage no, starts. And it's another more simple song. It's kind of a more typical indie rock track. It is like a fuzzy guitar solo and stuff. And it's a solid track. I like it for sure. There's not a song on this album that I really dislike. But again, it's kind of strange like structure for the album. The fact that Cheese Eye is flanked by two of the more kind of simple songs really makes it stick out like a sore thumb in the track listing. It almost sounds like it's from a whole different album. And Shugo talked about in interviews how this album wasn't really made with the intent of being an album. Like, he didn't make each song with like a bigger project in mind. He just kind of made each song as its own small project. And I can definitely hear that here. This feels less like a cohesive like album from front to back and more like a collection of songs, more like a Shugo Tokumaru mixtape. And I still really like the album. Like I like all the songs on here, but I definitely feel like the structure is a little disjointed and that definitely detracts from the album a little bit. I think just rearranging a few of these tracks could have made this a bit more of a cohesive listen. But it's not really a huge complaint because every song on here is really good. The song Nigiri is a really intimate and beautiful ballad that is kind of drenched in this kind of lo fi tape hiss or record noise, I guess. And the track Dodi is a really beautiful and incredibly well played instrumental piece of finger picked guitar with a little bit of indie pop and just a dash of country mixed in there as well. The song Vector is a kind of grand, instrumentally dense pop masterpiece that is kind of Beach Boys inspired at times. And I mean, I could just go on and on, but I just really want to stress this album is really really good from front to back. And this album ends with the song Bricolage Music, which is exactly what it sounds like. It is a big bricolage of various sounds. In the little booklet for the album, there's like 20 to 30 people credited for sounds on this song. And they're all like little less than a second sound bites of anything from like a synthesizer to a bunch of stuff rolling around to a percussion instrument to a more melodic sound. And what Shugo does with all these sounds is he kind of builds like this big cacophony of them. And from that, kind of slowly shapes them into a coherent melody of sorts. And then more traditional instrumentation, like guitars and brass and strings and woodwinds and such, will take over that melody from the kind of spawning pool of sounds and make like a more coherent musical piece out of it. And he does this a few times. Like he'll do like big cacophony of just sounds, and then he'll slowly transition that into a more typical melody where all of the various donated sounds will quiet down a bit and take more of a background role. And then after he's played out that melody for a bit, he'll switch back into this big kind of cacophony. It's like he's rummaging around in like a big chest just looking for sounds to pull together. And we're just hearing all these sounds being kind of thrown out behind him as he's searching. And it's definitely cool, and it has some really like interesting stuff going on, and he makes some really interesting fun melodies out of it, and it's clearly like a really just like interesting piece of art. But it does get a little cacophonous at times when he's kind of in between the more musical bits for me, and it's just a little bit too much for me at times to really enjoy listening to the whole song front to back. But it's definitely a really unique and interesting song. And I can definitely say that for just about every other track on here as well. This is a really unique, interesting record, as Shugo Tokumaru is a really unique, interesting artist. There's really not a song on here that I dislike. There are a couple songs that I find are just decent, like Roots and Hikage no. Those songs don't really blow me away the same way like Taxi and Vector does. But they're all good songs, and this is definitely a solid attempt, a solid return after a few years away for Shugo. And I'm feeling a 9 out of 10. This is a very solid, very good, very interesting, beautiful record that's really sharply written. It has some great performances from all the instrumentalists on here, and it has just a ton of interesting sound play as well. My only real complaints are like it could have been structured a little better. It could have made for a bit more of a cohesive listen, but it wasn't really meant to be a concept album or anything like that. But yeah, That's me. New Shugo Tokumaru record. It's called Toss, and it is very good. Let the record show that Shugo Tokumaru hasn't lost it yet, and he's still putting out great music. Peace.